Relations between India and the United States standing at a critical juncture right now. The stance over the war in Ukraine has left the countries divided. The 2+2 ministerial dialogue between the two sides coming at a very crucial time. Shortly, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden will be sitting down virtually. The two leaders are expected to talk over bilateral ties and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And then at 11:30 p.m. India time, that's 6 p.m. GMT, the 2+2 ministerial meeting will be starting. This will be the fourth ministerial dialogue of this kind. It will be led by India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and the External Affairs Minister S.S. Shankar. Their counterparts, Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken, will be present from Washington side. The meeting coming at a time when the US has been pressurizing India to take a stand against Russia. But India decides its own foreign policy, and in the Ukraine-Russia war, it has decided to stay neutral. Moscow and Kiev are both allies of New Delhi. So while India has condemned the violence in Ukraine, it has refused to pick a side, and the US clearly does not like that. Earlier, Joe Biden had directly targeted India. He had said that among the Quad partners, only India was being shaky about Russia's offensive. Well, New Delhi is not being shaky. India has clearly chosen dialogue over blame game. Recently, India bought around 13 million barrels of crude oil from Russia, reports suggesting that both New Delhi and Moscow are also trying to set up a rupee-ruble trading system. This comes at a time when the West is doing everything possible to turn the ruble into rubble. So in the latest talks, the war in Ukraine will most likely dominate the discussions. And with us on the broadcast is our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who's joining us from New Delhi. Siddhant, what can we expect New Delhi to really raise as its concerns as a part of those negotiations? Also, we do expect the US to bring up India's decision and its stance when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, something that New Delhi has been absolutely firm and clear about.
Well, it is a 12-hour of intense diplomatic engagement between US and India, starting with the big virtual meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden. The meeting is all set to start any moment. We are waiting for that meeting to start. But of course, on the table will be everything, whether it's Indo-Pacific, whether it is trade, whether it is the issue of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, something that is given that the Americans are expected to strongly voice their concerns on. This is a good platform too, but remember, India has been very, very strong on its stance that when it comes to this issue, it will go by its own national interest, something which we have seen practically being implemented, whether it's in New York, where in fact a meeting on Ukraine is underway, or whether it is engaging with Moscow or Washington. In fact, this meeting happens just 10 days after Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was here in Delhi, and he got the chance to meet the Indian Prime Minister, something that the other foreign ministers who were present in Delhi around that time, in fact, were not able to do so. So today will be an important day. The outcomes will, of course, decide on the next level of engagement between the two sides. We know that just a few months from now, Japan will be hosting the Quad in-person summit, the second Quad in-person summit, and we can expect both the leaders to have in-person conversation as well. They've already had one chance of in-person meeting last year, and that too also on the sidelines of the Quad summit in Washington. So today, of course, the focus will be on many things. In fact, a pact is expected to be signed at the 2+2 on space. That is basically to monitor space debris, meteorites or satellites as well. So that is something that is one of the key outcomes known as of now.
Right. Stay with me, Siddhant. Let's also get in our correspondent, Susan Teherani, onto the conversation. She's with us from New York, has been tracking those developments there. Susan, help us better understand how valid the West's concern over Russian oil purchase by India really is, given that Europe has maintained duplicity on that front when it had continued to buy Russian oil and at the same time questioned India's stance and decision on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. And I think there is something that, countries want to do. And then there is something that realistically countries can do at the end of the day. And this was a concern at the very beginning of Russia's invasion, that ultimately when you have virtue signaling and slogans of getting rid of Russian oil is something, because Russia is a mono economy, it would really put Russia in a hard place. But then when 40% of Europe's oil and gas comes from Russia, then it would ultimately put the neighborhood of Europe in a bad place as well, and its citizens as well. So, and it's interesting because it's something that the Biden administration itself is facing criticism over here as well. As you know, the United States was importing Russian oil, something around 600,000 barrels a day from Russia. And I think the reason that the administration here was facing criticism was that America's energy independent. It was in 2019. It could produce its own oil and be independent on the one hand. So it's not doing that itself. And then it's asking countries that doesn't even have that capacity to do that because of ideology and because of politics and because of slogans. And I think that's where the problem arises. So I think the United States understands that. President Biden ultimately behind closed doors understands that, and that's why we are hearing that things aren't going to really take an awkward turn, if you may, during that meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi because of that.
Right, Siddhant, the Russia-Ukraine war and the resultant complications as far as the concerns that have been raised is concerned. But let's also talk about the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, which is going to be another crucial aspect of those talks and will feature prominently, and something that both the sides have already expressed their strong commitment towards.
Well, yes, Indo-Pacific forms one of the key pillars of this relationship. Both Washington and New Delhi have been strongly supporting Indo-Pacific vision. They have been talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific. That basically means that the aggressive actions by the Chinese is a worry for countries in the region. There have been many practical announcements as well. Both countries, as part of the Quad, have announced scholarships for the students of the four countries. And also when it comes to vaccines as well, something that has been were the key announcements after the Quad meeting. But nonetheless, Indo-Pacific will see more strong emphasis by both the countries. And we have seen more and more countries joining this vision, not only the Quad member countries, but ASEAN has issued a white paper. Many European countries, whereas France, Germany, the key pillars of European Union, they have issued the vision, their announcements on the vision as well. In fact, EU had recently sent their envoy on Indo-Pacific to New Delhi to engage in the aftermath or the fallout of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But there is question, of course, globally as to how much there will be focus in coming few months, given that the West and particularly Europe is very preoccupied with the war on its borders. And will Europe able to give any support? We know that after the Russian invasion, it was the American initiative of calling on the Quad virtual meeting, basically to send a message to Beijing that the focus on Indo-Pacific continues. And that indeed has been the focus area from the American side, from the Indian side. But there are, of course, other worries geopolitically. Biggest, of course, is now Moscow in the minds of many Western capitals.
Right. Susan, the White House has delivered a string of statements ahead of this crucial meeting, one of them being that the U.S. does not want India to increase Russian imports. If you can elaborate for us the groundwork that the U.S. has already laid out as far as this crucial meeting is concerned and its stance.
Right. So what we do know from the White House is a statement that we got from Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, and there was a number of issues that were mentioned that the two leaders would speak about. A very diplomatic statement, if you may. It did talk a lot about how the two leaders would, quote, advance ongoing conversations about the development of an Indo-Pacific economic framework and delivering high-quality infrastructure. It also said President Biden will continue our close consultations on the consequences of Russia's brutal war against Ukraine and mitigating its destabilizing impact on global food supply and commodity markets. That's probably code word for talking about to what extent Russian gas and oil would be imported to India and elsewhere. But again, you go back to the fact that the United States has this capability of not only providing its own energy for itself to be energy independent, it has the capability to even export that for Europe to a great extent. It fails to do that because it wants to focus on green energy and whatnot in the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, and there are these virtual signaling slogans, but then it expects, other countries, because of the political and ideological impact that it would have, to forego, their own national interests. So it's a peculiar place for the Biden administration to be nonetheless, but this is where they stand. But this statement also acknowledges the fact that the Biden administration understands that there will be a food supply crisis, there will be fertilizer crisis for a lot of farmers, not only here in the United States, in India, and around the world. That's something that the two leaders want to talk about, and also, the issue of oil and gas as well. And we'll have to see. Maybe there'll be some kind of partnership with between the United States and India in that regard. But yes, a slew of issues on the table, nonetheless, in a very important meeting between the two largest democracies.
Right. Stay on with me, Susan. Siddhant, like I was discussing with Susan just a short while back, how the duplicity of the West came to the forefront as it questioned India's Russian oil imports while Europe continued to maintain its Russian oil imports supply. What has New Delhi stated regarding its decision to buy discounted Russian oil, which could feature prominently during those talks as well?
Well, India has been emphasizing that its national interest is paramount when it comes to any decision it takes, and importing discounted crude oil is part of that national interest. Now, we know that India, in fact, the Indian External Affairs Minister in the Parliament during the debate on Ukraine in the lower house of the Indian Parliament, Lok Sabha, talked about the duplicity. He basically said that the energy supplies from Russia to Europe continues, and cited that while India is importing discounted crude oil, the Russian crude oil not even stands in the top 10 list of importers from which India imports its crude oil. The Indian External Affairs Minister talked about how the West Asian countries remain a major supplier for the Indian energy needs, specifically, of course, crude oil, but also listed how America has, of course, emerged as one of the major suppliers of energy to India. In fact, 11% was the data given by the Indian External Affairs Minister, specifically when it comes to India's energy needs being imported from America. And that stands huge in terms of relatively, if we talk about how much India imports from Russia, that's around 1% or perhaps less than 1%. So while the West, specifically led by Europe, have been saying that India should cut its energy imports from Russia, but the West hasn't done that. So this is something that has been cited a lot. But what will be remembered here in Delhi will be the comments by the Deputy NSA, Dilip Singh. He met the Indian Foreign Secretary and also the Indian Trade Minister, given that Dilip Singh is also the G20 Sherpa for America. And we know the conversations he had. Specifically, something that riled up India was the use of the term consequences. There will be consequences. That was seen as a direct threat by an American government official. And this is something that is not liked when it comes to diplomacy. And we know that this was reiterated by the White House spokesperson as well. But that aside, while there are concerns, while there are commentaries being made, especially by the American side, which is seen as very undiplomatic, there are areas of convergences. And last 20 years, we have seen whether either of the administration Democrat or Republican, they have supported good relationship with New Delhi, but there can be some worry regarding the CAATSA sanctions. Will the US Congress now go ahead with CAATSA sanctions? Now India is getting S-400 is something that we need to watch out for.
Right, and that will be one of the many expected concerns that could be featuring prominently in those talks. The Indian Prime Minister will be sitting down virtually with the US President Joe Biden in just a while from now. We are monitoring those developments very closely. Those talks could begin any minute now. We're leaving it there for the moment, though. Susan and Siddhant, thanks very much for joining us with those updates.
Good to be here. Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you. We ready? Okay. Prime Minister Modi, it's always good to see you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Japan about the 24th of May, and I was honored to welcome you to the White House last September to discuss U.S.-Indian relations, to meet with our fellow Quad leaders, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak to you today virtually and with your two ministers and your ambassador here in person. Is it contemporaneous? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. There's two vibrant democracies who one is learning how to make sure I can do this contemporaneously. But two vibrant democracies. We take the same concerns about the global challenges we face with COVID-19, advancing health security and tracking the climate crisis, and we share a strong and growing major defense partnership. At the root of our partnership is a deep connection between our people, ties of family, of friendship, and of shared values. On that note, I want to welcome India's humanitarian support for the people of Ukraine, who are suffering a horrific assault, including a tragic shelling on a train station last week that killed dozens of innocent children and women and civilians attempting to flee the violence. The United States and India are going to continue our close consultation on how to manage the destabilizing effects of this Russian war. And I'm looking forward to our discussions today, Mr. Prime Minister. Our continued consultation and dialogue are key to ensuring the U.S.-Indian relationship continues to grow deeper and stronger, delivering our people and our global good that we all are seeking to manage, particularly in your part of the world. And the floor is yours, Mr. Prime Minister.
प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन, सबसे पहले मैं आपके गर्मजोशी भरे शब्दों के लिए आभार प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। आज हमारे रक्षा और विदेश मंत्री कुछ देर बाद 2+2 फॉर्मेट में मिलेंगे। उससे पहले हमारी यह मुलाकात उनकी बातचीत को दिशा देने के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है और इस वर्चुअल मुलाकात का इनिशिएटिव आपने लिया, इसके लिए भी मैं आपका अभिनंदन करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले साल सितंबर में जब मैं वॉशिंगटन आया था और जिसका आपने अभी जिक्र भी किया, और तब आपने कहा था कि भारत अमेरिका पार्टनरशिप बहुत सी वैश्विक समस्याओं के समाधान में योगदान दे सकती है। मैं आपकी बात से पूर्णतया सहमत हूं। विश्व के दो सबसे बड़े और पुराने लोकतंत्रों के रूप में हम नेचुरल पार्टनर्स हैं और पिछले कुछ वर्षों में हमारे संबंधों में जो प्रगति हुई है, जो नया मोमेंटम बना है, आज से एक दशक पहले भी शायद ऐसी कल्पना करना मुश्किल था। एक्सेलेंसी, आज की हमारी बातचीत ऐसे समय पर हो रही है जब यूक्रेन में स्थिति बहुत चिंताजनक बनी हुई है। कुछ सप्ताह पहले तक 20,000 से अधिक भारतीय यूक्रेन में फंसे हुए थे और इनमें से अधिकांश युवा छात्र थे। काफी मेहनत के बाद हम उन्हें वहां से सकुशल निकालने में सफल हुए। हालांकि एक छात्र ने अपना जीवन खो दिया। इस पूरे घटनाक्रम के दौरान मैंने यूक्रेन और रूस दोनों के राष्ट्रपतियों से कई बार फोन पर बातचीत की। मैंने न सिर्फ शांति की अपील की, बल्कि मैंने राष्ट्रपति पुतिन को यूक्रेन के राष्ट्रपति के साथ सीधी बातचीत का सुझाव भी रखा। हमारी संसद में भी यूक्रेन के विषय पर बहुत विस्तार से चर्चा हुई। हाल में बूचा शहर में निर्दोष नागरिकों की हत्याओं की खबर बहुत ही चिंताजनक थी। हमने इसकी तुरंत निंदा की और एक निष्पक्ष जांच की मांग भी की है। हम आशा करते हैं कि रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रही बातचीत से शांति का मार्ग निकलेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, हमने यूक्रेन में सिविलियन जनता की सुरक्षा और उनको मानवीय सहायता की निर्बाध आपूर्ति पर भी महत्व दिया है और जिसका अभी आपने प्रारंभ में जिक्र भी किया। हमने अपनी तरफ से दवाइयां व अन्य राहत सामग्री यूक्रेन और उनके पड़ोसी देशों को भेजी है और यूक्रेन की मांग पर हम शीघ्र ही दवाइयों का एक और कंसाइनमेंट भेज रहे हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, आपने अपने कार्यकाल के शुरू में ही एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण स्लोगन दिया था, डेमोक्रेसी कैन डिलीवर। भारत और अमेरिका की पार्टनरशिप की सफलता इस स्लोगन को सार्थक करने का सबसे उत्तम जरिया है। इस साल भारत अपनी स्वतंत्रता की 75वां वर्षगांठ मना रहा है और हम अपने डिप्लोमेटिक रिलेशंस की 75वीं सालगिरह भी मना रहे हैं। मुझे विश्वास है कि भारत की अगले 25 सालों की विकास यात्रा में अमेरिका के साथ हमारी मित्रता एक अभिन्न अंग रहेगी। एक बार फिर आज के आयोजन के लिए आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Minister, we're going to hold for just a moment, Mr. Prime Minister, while the press leaves the room.